What if the most feared man in hip-hop history ran into someone who simply refused to be afraid? At a time when Suge Knight's name alone could shut down conversations, end careers, and make artists rethink entire moves, one rapper stood completely unmoved. Eminem never lowered his voice, never changed his tone, and never acted like intimidation meant anything to him. While others whispered warnings and avoided confrontation, Eminem did the opposite. He said exactly what he wanted, when he wanted, on records heard by millions. And the shocking part wasn't that he survived doing it. It was that he never once looked back. This wasn't about street toughness or physical threats. It was about mindset. Fear only works when both sides agree it has power. Suge Knight ruled an era where silence was survival, where fear was currency, and where reputation could control entire rooms. Eminem walked into that same industry with no respect for fear politics and no interest in playing along. He didn't grow up believing certain people were untouchable. He didn't rely on industry protection. And he didn't see intimidation as strength. He saw it as weakness. That difference made him dangerous in a way Suge Knight wasn't prepared for. Because you can't scare someone who doesn't care about consequences, who already feels like they have nothing to lose, and who understands that words can travel farther than threats ever will. Eminem's confidence wasn't loud muscle. It was quiet certainty. And that certainty made him immune to a system built on control. To understand why Eminem never feared Suge Knight, you have to look past rumors and reputations and focus on one simple truth. Fear only survives when it's believed. And Eminem never believed in it. Eminem's refusal to fear Suge Knight starts with understanding where Eminem came from and why intimidation never held the same weight for him as it did for others in the music industry. Before fame, before record deals, before magazine covers and sold-out arenas, Eminem was already used to being counted out. He grew up in environments where respect wasn't given and protection wasn't guaranteed. Battling in underground circles, getting booed off stages, and being dismissed by labels built a mindset where approval and fear both lost their power. By the time Eminem entered the mainstream, he had already faced rejection so consistently that threats carried very little meaning. Fear only works when someone believes they have something to lose, and for most of his early life, Eminem felt like he had nothing except his voice. That voice became his weapon, his shield, and his way out. When Suge Knight's reputation loomed large over the industry, it represented an old guard built on silence, leverage, and control. Eminem never respected that structure because it wasn't the structure that lifted him. His rise wasn't dependent on industry favors, street alliances, or behind-the-scenes power players. It was built on skill, controversy, and authenticity that couldn't be negotiated or threatened away. Eminem didn't view Suge Knight as an untouchable figure because he never viewed the industry as something that could grant or take away his legitimacy. His credibility came from listeners who connected to his honesty, not executives who demanded obedience. Another key factor was timing. By the time Eminem became a global star, Suge Knight's dominance was already cracking. Death Row Records was no longer the unstoppable force it once was, and its influence was fading as the industry evolved. Eminem watched this from the outside, understanding that fear has an expiration date. Power built on intimidation eventually collapses when people stop believing in it. Eminem saw Suge Knight not as a threat, but as a symbol of a past era struggling to maintain relevance. This perspective stripped Suge of his mystique. Eminem didn't grow up idolizing that version of hip-hop leadership, so he felt no obligation to respect it. His approach to confrontation was also different. Eminem confronted through lyrics, satire, and exposure rather than physical presence. He understood that, in the modern media age, reputation could be dismantled publicly. This gave him leverage that Suge Knight's traditional intimidation tactics couldn't easily counter. Eminem's pen allowed him to speak freely without stepping into environments where physical threats mattered. That distance neutralized fear. He could say what others only whispered, knowing that once words were released into the world, they couldn't be pulled back. Eminem also trusted his alliance with Dr. Dre, someone who had already survived Suge Knight's empire and emerged stronger. Watching Dre rebuild his career independently showed Eminem that Suge Knight's power was not absolute. If Dre could walk away and thrive, then Suge was not invincible. This reinforced Eminem's belief that intimidation was temporary, while talent and resilience lasted longer. Eminem never sought validation from Suge Knight or anyone connected to that system. He didn't chase approval, protection, or acceptance. That independence made fear irrelevant. Suge Knight's influence relied on people needing something from him. Eminem didn't. And because of that, intimidation had nowhere to land. Eminem's confidence was rooted in self-awareness, not bravado. He knew exactly who he was, what he represented, and why people listened. That clarity made him immune to pressure. Fear thrives in uncertainty, but Eminem's certainty about his purpose removed that vulnerability. In the end, Eminem didn't need to challenge Suge Knight directly to prove anything. His existence alone was a challenge to the idea that fear controlled hip-hop. By continuing to speak freely, create without permission, and refuse to acknowledge intimidation, Eminem showed that power built on fear only works when people allow it to. He never did. Eminem's lack of fear toward Suge Knight also becomes clearer when you look at how each man understood power and reputation. Suge Knight's influence was built in a time when physical presence, intimidation, and control over resources shaped the industry. His reputation traveled faster than facts, and many people feared what he might do rather than what he had actually done to them personally. Eminem entered hip-hop at a moment when media exposure, controversy, and public opinion were becoming stronger forces than behind-the-scenes threats. He understood that narratives could be flipped in real time and that fear lost effectiveness once it was mocked publicly. Eminem's willingness to speak openly was something Suge Knight's style of power couldn't easily manage. Silence was one of Suge's strongest weapons, but Eminem refused to stay quiet. He openly referenced industry politics, name-dropped powerful figures, and turned tension into entertainment. When intimidation is dragged into the spotlight, it loses its mystery. Eminem understood this instinctively. By addressing things head-on, often with humor or exaggeration, he removed the seriousness that fear depends on. Laughing at power is one of the fastest ways to strip it of authority. Another important factor was Eminem's relationship with conflict itself. Eminem never viewed conflict as something to avoid. From battle rap to controversial lyrics, confrontation was part of his identity. Suge Knight's reputation thrived on the idea that conflict would be dangerous or costly. Eminem didn't see conflict that way. To him, confrontation was fuel. Every attempt to intimidate or silence him only reinforced his image as someone unfiltered and fearless. That dynamic flipped the power balance. Instead of backing down, Eminem leaned in. Eminem also benefited from distance. He wasn't physically present in the same circles that Suge Knight dominated during his peak years. Eminem operated in studios, media interviews, and global stages rather than industry backrooms. That separation mattered. Fear works best up close, where presence and pressure can be felt. Eminem kept his battles lyrical and cultural, not physical. This allowed him to challenge figures like Suge Knight without entering environments where intimidation had teeth. There was also a generational shift happening. Eminem represented a new era of artists who were less concerned with gatekeepers and more focused on direct connection with audiences. His fan base wasn't dependent on industry approval. That independence weakened the leverage of older power structures. Suge Knight's influence relied on control over access, but Eminem didn't need access. He already had attention. And attention, once secured, is harder to threaten than opportunity. Eminem's transparency also played a role. He openly discussed his fears, insecurities, and flaws in his music. That honesty removed the leverage others might have used against him. When someone has already exposed their vulnerabilities publicly, threats lose their impact. There was nothing left to hold over his head. Eminem had already said it himself. This self-exposure made intimidation ineffective because it relies on secrets, shame, and silence. It's also important to recognize that Eminem never tried to compete with Suge Knight on Suge's terms. He didn't attempt to assert dominance through physical presence or alliances. He stayed in his lane and let his work speak. That refusal to engage in power games denied Suge Knight the reaction that intimidation requires. Fear feeds on acknowledgement. Eminem rarely acknowledged it seriously. When he did, it was often framed as satire or commentary rather than submission. Eminem's global success further insulated him from fear. Once an artist reaches a certain level, threats become symbolic rather than practical. Eminem's platform was too large to quietly silence. Any attempt to intimidate him would only amplify his voice. Suge Knight's influence was strongest when things happened quietly. Eminem existed too loudly for that approach to work. Another key difference was motivation. Suge Knight's power was about control and dominance. Eminem's drive was about expression and survival. Those motivations don't collide evenly. You can threaten control, but it's much harder to threaten someone whose purpose is internal. Eminem didn't rely on external validation to keep going. That made him resilient in ways intimidation couldn't break. Ultimately, Eminem never feared Suge Knight because fear was never part of his operating system. He didn't deny Suge's reputation, but he didn't internalize it. He understood that fear is learned behavior, reinforced by stories and silence. By refusing to participate in that cycle, Eminem showed that even the most feared figures lose power when their intimidation is met with indifference. Eminem's mindset toward fear was also shaped by how he viewed authenticity and credibility in hip-hop. To him, respect didn't come from who you scared or how powerful your connections were. Respect came from skill, honesty, and the ability to move people through music. Suge Knight represented an era where authority was enforced rather than earned, where fear could substitute for respect. Eminem never accepted that equation. In his world, if someone needed intimidation to maintain status, that status was already fragile. This belief made it easy for him to dismiss the myth around Suge Knight's invincibility. Eminem didn't see power as something external that could be taken away. He saw it as something internal that either existed or didn't. That distinction mattered. Eminem also had an unusually high tolerance for chaos. Controversy followed him from the beginning of his career. Parents groups criticized him, politicians condemned his lyrics, media outlets tried to cancel him, and entire demographics questioned his place in hip-hop. Living under constant scrutiny hardened him. When you're already being attacked from every direction, additional pressure doesn't register the same way. Suge Knight's reputation thrived on creating discomfort and fear, but Eminem had already learned to operate inside discomfort. He didn't seek peace or safety from the industry. He expected resistance. That expectation neutralized intimidation before it could take root. Another overlooked factor is Eminem's understanding of narrative control. Eminem knew that whoever controlled the story controlled the power. Suge Knight's influence relied heavily on stories told behind closed doors, whispered warnings, and unspoken consequences. Eminem pulled narratives into the open. Through lyrics and interviews, he reframed situations publicly, often exaggerating or mocking them. By doing this, he took control of the narrative before anyone else could use it against him. Fear loses strength when it's openly discussed rather than hidden. Eminem made secrecy impossible. Eminem's sense of humor also played a critical role. He used satire as armor. Humor disarms intimidation because it refuses to take threats seriously. Suge Knight's image was built on seriousness, authority, and menace. Eminem responded with sarcasm and ridicule, which disrupted that image. When a feared figure becomes the subject of jokes, their power weakens. Eminem understood that laughter spreads faster than fear. Once people laugh at something, it becomes harder to fear it. This psychological shift mattered more than physical confrontation ever could. There was also a cultural gap between Eminem and Suge Knight that worked in Eminem's favor. Eminem didn't grow up idolizing the same figures or subscribing to the same rules. He wasn't emotionally invested in the mythology surrounding Suge Knight. To fear someone, you often have to believe in the system that made them powerful. Eminem never fully believed in that system. He viewed it from the outside, which allowed him to analyze it rather than submit to it. Distance creates clarity. Eminem's outsider perspective stripped away the mystique that intimidated others. Eminem's loyalty to his own circle further insulated him. He trusted a small group of people and avoided unnecessary industry entanglements. Suge Knight's influence worked best in environments where relationships overlapped and obligations created leverage. Eminem minimized those vulnerabilities. He didn't owe favors, didn't seek alliances, and didn't depend on approval from powerful figures outside his team. That independence removed the pressure points intimidation depends on. Without leverage, fear becomes empty. It's also important to understand that Eminem never romanticized danger. He didn't confuse recklessness with courage. His refusal to fear wasn't about provoking confrontation. It was about refusing to alter his behavior based on threats. He didn't chase Suge Knight's attention or escalate conflict unnecessarily. He simply continued doing what he always did. That consistency sent a clear message. Fear didn't dictate his decisions. And when fear doesn't dictate behavior, it loses relevance. Eminem's massive commercial success added another layer of protection. At a certain level, an artist becomes bigger than individual power players. Eminem wasn't just a rapper. He was a global brand with millions of listeners. Any attempt to silence or intimidate him would create backlash and scrutiny. Suge Knight's influence was most effective in quieter spaces. Eminem existed in the loudest possible space. That imbalance favored Eminem. Power that thrives in shadows struggles in the spotlight. Another reason Eminem never feared Suge Knight is that he didn't confuse reputation with reality. He understood that stories grow larger than the people behind them. Over time, fear can become self-sustaining, independent of actual action. Eminem questioned that cycle. He wasn't reckless, but he wasn't hypnotized by reputation either. He treated Suge Knight like a human being, not a myth. And myths lose power once they're humanized. Eminem's confidence also came from knowing his exit plan. He never saw music as his only identity. While he was deeply committed to his craft, he wasn't dependent on industry validation to feel whole. That psychological independence matters. Fear is most effective when someone feels trapped. Eminem never felt trapped. He believed he could survive with or without industry approval. That belief made intimidation irrelevant. Ultimately, Eminem didn't defeat fear by confronting it directly. He defeated it by refusing to center it in his decision-making. Suge Knight represented a form of power that relied on obedience and silence. Eminem represented a new kind of power built on visibility, expression, and indifference to intimidation. Those two forces were never evenly matched. Fear needs belief to survive. Eminem never believed. Eminem's refusal to fear Suge Knight ultimately reflects a deeper shift in how power functioned in hip-hop and how Eminem positioned himself within that shift. By the time their names were ever mentioned in the same conversations, the industry was already transforming. The rules that once allowed intimidation to thrive were being replaced by visibility, documentation, and accountability. Eminem understood that power no longer lived only in closed rooms. It lived in public perception. And public perception was something he knew how to influence better than almost anyone. Suge Knight's authority depended on the idea that consequences would happen quietly and decisively. Eminem operated in a world where everything became content. That alone neutralized fear. Eminem also had a rare ability to separate art from emotion. While his music was deeply emotional, his decision-making was calculated. He knew when to push boundaries and when to let things exist as statements rather than confrontations. This emotional control mattered. Intimidation works best on people who react impulsively or emotionally. Eminem rarely did. He observed, processed, and responded on his own terms. That patience made him unpredictable in a way that fear-based power structures couldn't easily manage. Another critical element was Eminem's relationship with truth. He had already built a career on exposing his own flaws, mistakes, and darkest thoughts. There was very little anyone could threaten to reveal about him that he hadn't already turned into a record. Fear often relies on the threat of exposure. Eminem removed that leverage by exposing himself first. When someone controls their own narrative so completely, intimidation loses its teeth. There's nothing left to take away. Eminem also understood that Suge Knight's reputation was inseparable from a specific moment in time. That moment had passed. Hip-hop had expanded globally. Audiences were younger, more diverse, and less invested in old industry hierarchies. Eminem spoke directly to those audiences. His relevance didn't depend on legacy power brokers. That generational disconnect weakened Suge Knight's influence over him. Fear doesn't transfer well across generations unless it's constantly reinforced. Eminem belonged to a generation that questioned everything. There was also a philosophical difference in how each man viewed loyalty. Suge Knight's system relied on enforced loyalty, where allegiance was expected and deviation was punished. Eminem's loyalty was voluntary and earned. He stayed close to people who believed in him and distanced himself from those who didn't. That freedom made him difficult to control. You can't threaten someone into loyalty if they never sought it in the first place. Eminem didn't believe loyalty should be coerced. That belief removed him from Suge Knight's sphere of influence entirely. Eminem's confidence also came from knowing the limits of intimidation. He understood that fear can influence behavior only within certain boundaries. It can't create talent. It can't erase authenticity. It can't make audiences forget what they connect with. Eminem trusted that connection. He knew people didn't listen to him because he was protected or powerful. They listened because his words resonated. That connection couldn't be threatened away by any individual. It existed independently of industry politics. Another important factor was Eminem's awareness of consequences. He wasn't reckless or unaware of potential risks. He simply refused to let hypothetical consequences dictate his voice. That distinction matters. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's the decision to act without letting fear control outcomes. Eminem acknowledged danger without magnifying it. He assessed reality rather than rumors. That grounded approach prevented intimidation from becoming psychological control. Eminem also benefited from the changing nature of accountability. As the industry evolved, actions became harder to hide. Legal systems, media scrutiny, and public documentation reduced the effectiveness of fear-based dominance. Eminem trusted those shifts. He knew that the era where someone could operate entirely in the shadows was fading. That knowledge gave him confidence to speak freely. Fear thrives in darkness. Eminem lived in the spotlight. It's also worth noting that Eminem never tried to portray himself as fearless. He never claimed invincibility. His power came from honesty, not bravado. That authenticity made his stance believable. When he didn't react to intimidation, it didn't feel performative. It felt natural. That authenticity is hard to challenge because it doesn't rely on image. It relies on consistency. Eminem was consistent in who he was and how he spoke. That consistency removed opportunities for manipulation. Eminem's refusal to fear Suge Knight also reflected his broader rejection of idol worship. He never treated powerful figures as untouchable. He questioned authority across the board, whether it came from politicians, celebrities, or industry leaders. Suge Knight wasn't unique in that sense. Eminem didn't single him out as someone special. He treated him like any other figure subject to critique. That equalizing approach stripped away hierarchy. Fear depends on hierarchy. Eminem flattened it. Another layer was Eminem's long-term perspective. He wasn't focused on short-term consequences. He thought in terms of legacy. He knew that history tends to favor those who speak honestly over those who rely on intimidation. That belief guided his choices. He wasn't trying to survive a moment. He was building something lasting. Fear-based power is often short-lived. Eminem invested in longevity. Ultimately, Eminem never feared Suge Knight because fear never aligned with his values, his experiences, or his understanding of power. He didn't deny Suge Knight's reputation, but he didn't give it authority over his life or his voice. Eminem recognized that fear is a social agreement. Once you stop agreeing, it loses meaning. By refusing to participate in that agreement, Eminem showed that intimidation only works when people accept it. He never did. If you made it this far, it tells me you don't just watch hip-hop stories, you study them. And that's exactly what this channel is about. Breaking down the moments, mindsets, and power moves that shaped the culture beyond the headlines. If you appreciate deep dives that don't rely on rumors, but instead focus on context, psychology, and real industry dynamics, then you're in the right place. Make sure you hit the like button because it helps push these stories to more people who care about hip-hop history. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next breakdown, because the stories coming up only get deeper, darker, and more revealing. Turn on notifications so you're always first when a new video drops. Drop a comment and let me know what you think. Did Eminem's approach to fear change how power works in hip-hop, or do you think intimidation still plays a role today? Your comments help shape future videos, and I actually read them. If you want to support the channel even more, there will be links below where you can check out exclusive content, playlists, and upcoming projects. Share this video with someone who thinks they know hip-hop, because chances are they've never looked at it from this angle. This channel isn't about picking sides. It's about understanding the game. And if you want more stories that explain not just what happened, but why it happened, stay locked in right here.